Okay, so today we're going to move into a formal presentation with Frank Granshaw on the Climate Toolkit, an update and invitation to participate. In July of 2020, the Climate Toolkit was released through Portland State University's PDX Scholar as a freely available open source document. The toolkit is a set of learning activities built around the prominent online climate models, interactive atlases, and public databases. Though originally designed for undergraduate non-science majors, it is intended for use in both formal and informal educational settings. We're going to be looking at the next stage of the toolkit's development and how the webinar participants can assist with this process. And our speaker is Frank Granshaw, and he is a retired geoscience educator now engaged in climate education and advocacy through Portland State University, the Greater Portland Sustainability Education Network, the Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon's Creation Justice Program, American Geophysical Union, and the Oregon Science Network of the Union of Concerned Scientists. He's also author of the Climate Toolkit, a resource manual for climate science and action. So take it away, Frank.
Okay. If I knew you were going to read all of that, I wouldn't have made it so long.
Well, I just, for the recording, I think, in case anybody's
Okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen here, so give me just a moment to hope this works. So how are we doing there? Can everybody see what should be there? Okay, cool. Okay, just give me just a moment here to rearrange my screen. So I got the Hollywood squares on one of the screens. You can see everybody. And let's put this in a present mode. Yeah, great. So I think Patrick may have made this this slide deck, which is a Google slide deck, available to everybody. And and that's good because of the fact that, excuse me for just 1 second here. Yeah, that doesn't work. Okay. And that's a good thing just because of the fact that there's a number of links in here. And so let's get to my title screen. So what I want to talk about here is actually kind of a rerun, if you will, of some things I talked about on, oh gads, I think it's almost been a year ago when I was talking about a course that we teach here at Portland State that's called Global Environmental Change, which is, for lack of better terms, a climate science for non-science majors type course. And so as the title says here, I'm going to give you an update on one of the elements of that course, which is a manual that I hesitate to say I've written because there's been a lot of other participants in the process, but nevertheless, it's got my name on the title. And some updates, and as it says down there, an invitation to participate. So I'm going to see how fast I can talk here, just simply because I want to leave enough space there to get a fairly robust Q&A, because I'm asking for some volunteers and some insights on this process going forward. So let's see if I can get this to behave itself. There we go. Okay, so 4 topics I want to talk to you about. First of all, about the Climate Toolkit itself. Look at the present structure of the kit. That's, when I say present structure, I'm talking about what's online. And then go through and talk about some ongoing development. And then finally get into my ask, which is an invitation to contribute as far as the development of this particular resource. So a little bit about the toolkit. You're seeing a couple of screens off to the side here that are directly out of PDX Scholar. The one is the online, is the black one up in the corner is the title page for the online version, because you can either download this as a PDX or view it online. The other is actually the entrance page, or what you would find if you followed the appropriate links. And incidentally, these graphics right here in the presentation are linked over directly to the, linked. I see a couple of hands raised. Was there something I'm missing here?
Yeah, just a quick question, Frank.
Sure.
I'm not familiar with PDX Scholar. Is that a free open? I mean, as it says there is a free open source textbook. Is that what PDX Scholar provides?
Actually, let me click on it so you can go right into it.
Sure. It's a,
There we
things
go.
are moving around. So
Yeah, there we go. So here's there's PDX Scholar right there. It's essentially a portal for open source textbooks as well as thesis and dissertations, etc.
cool.
That the university has.
So it's a university proprietary to the university system.
Right.
It's not a universal thing.
No,
Portland
it's
State
something
thing.
that anybody can access.
No, I understand it, but it's something that Portland State put up to provide
Yes.
a service for Portland State that is free and open access. Okay,
Right.
just wanted a little context. That's all. Thanks, Frank.
Okay, no problem. So so that went on. The open source text went online in July 1st, 2020, and has had almost about 410 downloads since then, and that doesn't include reads. So I'm feeling good about that, particularly since it's been through about 24 countries that's happened. A little bit on the structure of the toolkit. It's got 24, it's based around 24 investigations. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a pedagogical process that was developed at Franklin and Marshall College for their chemistry department called POGIL, or Process-Oriented Guided Instruction and Learning. But it's a guided inquiry process that a lot of this is tailored after. DeVarty, I see a thumbs up. You must be familiar with it. Anyway, you've got 24 investigations here that utilize about 18 online tools. I'll talk a little bit more about what these are, but if any of you are familiar with C-Roads and N-Roads, those are some of the ones that are in there. The key thing about these investigations are meant to guide students to do their own climate research rather than impose a script on them or sort of shower down knowledge on them. The investigations look at both climate science and research processes, but also have a orientation towards policy in a number of places. When you look at the individual investigations, I tried to use a standard format for all of them. We got about 24 investigations that begin with some key questions to sort of give the students a context of where they're going. Some background on both the tool and the topics, a listing of the tools and the topics with links. One of the cool things about this being online is students can access it online and then link directly over the tools they need, which are embedded in the text. And then finally, there's the activities themselves, which are centered around the online tools. Off to the side is some screen prints or some chops out of one of the activities on shifting biomes that actually uses, I don't know how many of you are, oh, Gats, now it's out the back of my brain. Yeah, okay, I'll have to look it up. Oh, there we go. Climate Reanalyzer. Excellent tool. And that's one of the ones that are used in there. In terms of the investigations in the manual, we've got them broken up pretty much as I teach the course, which is weather and climate basics that we begin with, and then we get into looking at present impacts, and then move from there into paleoclimate change. Something I like to do because I'm a geologist, potential climate change, and then finally the last part called going forward, where we get into mitigation, adaptation, and action strategies. There's you can see down there a number of different activities listed. Again, if you get a copy of this slide deck, which I'm hoping Patrick has provided to everybody, you should be able to get right in there and look at these guys. The last part of this is actually the appendices in the back. And I've got 3 appendices in the manual, one of which is a description of the tools. So one of the ones that some of you may be familiar with, Build Your Own Earth. They are the website, and the folks from Manchester are big on calling it BYOE, is actually what would you call it? Online viewer of model results from what they call a foam model. And it's a really excellent way to introduce students to some of the basic logistics of climate systems. So there's that. The Appendix B is some other resources. So it's links out to other textbooks and reports, etc. And Appendix C is a big one for me, since I've been involved somewhat with UNFCCC events, is an appendix which describes the international process. And one of the cool things about this particular format versus a textbook, there are a lot of textbooks out there that I've used, which are excellent, and I don't pretend to run competition with them. But one of the problems is anybody who's familiar with the textbook publishing cycles knows that one of the big problems you bump into is the fact that they quickly go out of date. And to expect students year after year to not have access to used copies is a real difficulty just in terms of student costs. And this is particularly true when you're talking about something like the UNFCCC process and the international process in general, is that a textbook that's 5 years old, that's almost ancient history. So the nice thing about this is that I can regularly get in and update that appendix. Okay, now moving into the next part, which is what's been happening. So as I said, in July 1st, 2020, we went online for the first time with the open source document. And it's been one of the delightful things about this process is the fact that I've been working with a whole team of people here at Portland State to make this happen. And our librarians have been fantastic in terms of giving me the guidance and helping with the technical aspects, as well as encouraging me to go out and find new avenues to do further development, because they're particularly excited about the idea of open source textbooks. So this last fall was my first time teaching remote this course. And so there was a whole level of development I needed to do to preserve that aspect of cooperative learning. And so the fall 2020 saw the development of a whole series of ancillary materials to support these cooperative learning activities in a remote framework. So what this ended up resulting in was a number of slide decks, which I now make available to the other team members who teach this same course. There's 2 other sections this term that I'm consulting with in terms of using this material. So it resulted in slide decks, which both the instructors and the students use, note packs, which are essentially PDF printouts of the slide decks with the presenter notes, and then finally activity record sheets. I don't know how many of you had much experience with Google Forms, but it's an excellent way to be able to structure out online cooperative learning activities. So right now we've got slide decks, note packs, and activity record sheets for about 20 of the 24 activities. And those are all available to the students through a Google Drive, as well as to the other people teaching the course. So this brings us up to pretty close to present day. December 2020, I get a call from one of my colleagues, or if you will, the development team for the online version, saying, hey, our Office of Information Technology has a program called the Open Academic Innovation Mini Fund Program, where they're willing to pay you to continue to develop what you're developing. So in December 2020, I put in a proposal to update the toolkit to incorporate the ancillary material, as well as develop some new activities. And I'm also going to say to change a few of them. There's a few activities I think need some updating. So they encouraged me to apply, and then I got accepted. And so I'm now in a development cycle working with other instructors who teach this course, as well as the same team I worked with to develop the open source version. And this development is slated to be completed by June 2021. So here's my ask. There are two things that I'm really looking for. First of all, as I said, this, even though my name's on the title, it's really, if you go to the acknowledgements, there's a whole long list of people who contributed to this effort. And I invite some of you who are interested to join in to become either content or pedagogy reviewers for both the ancillary packages as well as some of the new activities. And the other thing I'd like to, after we have any questions that folks might have, that I'd like to talk with folks about, I'm going to shift my screen just a tad bit here. I'd like to, and also I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. The other thing I'd also like to ask of folks is, after we've had a chance to talk about any questions you might have. I'm sorry, I'm playing musical screens. It's not working here. Is the, for my own personal future here, one of the things I'm looking at is 40 years of grading, I feel like is enough. And so I'm seriously considering, and actually I've talked to my department chair about hanging up my spurs with classroom teaching. Doesn't necessarily mean that I will no longer be around Portland State as a researcher or something of that nature, but definitely bumping out of the classroom environment. In which case, one of the things I'm looking at doing is taking something seriously, I said in the introduction to the current manual, is trying to figure out how to use this manual in informal educational circumstances. One of the things that Jen mentioned when she was reading through is that I'm also part of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. And so I've oftentimes thought about how could I use, which of these activities could I use with the church group? Or which of these could I use with a group of activists? I've got a friend who's a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby who did a whole series called Climate Science for Activists. Because there are a lot of activists who are convinced they've got it all figured out, who you get them in front of a climate denier with a PhD and they're toast. And so there's a certain amount of defense work that we need to be doing there. Anyway, so I'm gonna stop my ramble and give you guys a chance to A, ask questions, and B, throw out some suggestions in terms of that idea of moving this kind of resource into a non-academic setting.
Thanks so much, Frank. Just curious about reactions and thoughts to Frank's presentation and the work that he's doing.
Can I just squeal with delight? Like, is that an appropriate professional response? I'm not sure, but that's what I want to do.
Squeal with delight. Love it.
Frank, you're muted. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
I just
Wendy.
unmuted myself. So Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, so for the informal education, one of the questions we have right now for the Hollywood teams is how to provide information for them in a format that's not text-based. We were talking about getting videos up so that they can just scroll through on their own and get access to information. If you want to continue some conversation about how to adapt this to audiences, we can talk after.
Yeah, I really would like to do that. I'm thinking a couple of things. First of all, the ancillary materials are going to be much more graphics heavy than the actual instruction is. The other thing I'd encourage folks to do to think about this further is to take a look at the resources that are being used in the manual, because resources like C-Roads and N-Roads, they've got this whole infrastructure that they're using to do with non-academic groups. And they're real excited to have somebody put it included in their manual, but they've got a bunch of stuff that they're doing that I've tried to essentially build on for and adjust for these situations.
Hey,
Jane,
Frank.
yeah.
This is Wendy from AMS, and I am thrilled, ecstatic, happy, and impressed with your work. And I'm having my own existential crisis because the AMS education program publishes a introductory for non-science major curriculum with many of the same kinds of resources that you're describing, and it helps support all of our K-12 teacher programs. And we are knee deep in the midst of a major update to that curriculum package right now. But it is not freely available because we need to pay our staff to do the work and also have some resource that we can use to teach our K-12 teacher programs. And I'm actively seeking funding to support my effort. Now, while we're all educators and we know that there is plenty of room for unique spins and different versions of similar curriculum, I really am excited about your work and know how great the need is. I'm going to have to send my team to check it out and compare it to the work we're in the midst of. And then as the leader, I mean, if they were so closely tied that yours would be better for many audiences than the ones I'm trying to serve, that would create an interesting decision point for me to stop my team's work and look at yours. But that's why, since I'm on video and I know my face doesn't hide all, I just wanted to tell you what was happening here.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, Appendix B, refer to Appendix B because that's a list of other resources.
Are we in it?
You know, you're not in it yet, but if you give me more information, I can put you in it. And one of the things is, I'm not necessarily meaning this manual. I'm one person who happens to be fortunate enough to have a group of people who are interested in working with me. But I recognize my limitations being kind of a institutional entrepreneur, I guess. And so the manual is not a complete work. It's much better for me to refer people out to other pieces of work out there. I mean, fortunately, all of the things that are in there are free, but doesn't preclude other possibilities. Jim.
Yeah, one of the things that some of our teacher mentees, the teachers that we work with, involve informal educators. And I just had a long conversation with one of them this morning who works at the New York Museum of Natural History, National Museum of Natural History. And he has done a great job adapting some of our content and activities for his informal audiences as a docent at that museum. And that's an area that I'm particularly interested in terms of working with executives in industrial firms and that sort of thing. So there may be some ideas that I can forward to you about that. And it's certainly true that it can be done to take a textbook-based, lab manual-based, printed or online set of materials and then modify it to that point where you can get it into short presentations by a docent in a museum or other informal kind of environment.
Yeah, if you could send me his contact information, that'd be great, because I got about 10 years worth of science museum experience under my belt.
Wonderful. I'll do that.
I'd love to. Frank?
Yeah. So Frank, sorry guys, it's just our thing. You know, one of the things I think we've all struggled with in this space is that we have to attend to the learning pathways for anyone, and that the subject is so massive, and that whatever's in your piece is also parts of it are in the work that Wendy's doing and other things that are in this space. But what's I think most crucial is that wherever you enter into this, that you attend to the next part of that learning journey that everyone's going to be on. I mean, I've been on it for 25 years and I'm still learning. And so I don't think I think we all are going to be on that learning journey because it's a dynamic system. Human reactions are going to be dynamic. It's a changing system. We don't know how things are going to, it's always going to be learning. But what I think we still have not done a great job is if you're a student, if you come into your course and you wanted to go deeper, where would you go to go deeper? And if they came into climate studies through AMS and they wanted to go deeper over here, where would they go? You know, Project Drawdown is building out some more materials here, but you know, each of them have different focus areas. I mean, one of the questions I had for you also. So, I mean, one, we just need to do a better job of giving people pathways to all the relevant materials. And it's like Catherine Hayhoe has been putting up a lot of her lectures, but it's somewhere out there, and that's not a really great guidepost. You might be, not everyone's good at finding stuff on the internet. But another piece of the question for you, Frank, is the solution ratio to your course. If you had to give it a percentage, like how much is it, you know, our understanding of the science and our understanding of the system and it's changing and why it's changing and what we're going to do about it, because that's, I mean, what we're hearing from students is they really want way more over here. But if it's all they do over here, then they're vulnerable over here. So there's a balance. What would you say your balance is in your course?
Well, okay. The one thing that's important is that the course that I teach, even though it's taught through university studies, is a geology faculty.
Yep.
And this course used to be taught almost strictly as a historical geology course.
Right.
And some of the original people who taught it were actually somewhat climate skeptics. I mean, geologists have that habit at times because of who they work for. So I would say what I've pushed things towards, while still keeping it accessible for the other people who teach the course, has been kind of a 25-75 mix. The 75 mix has been, okay, this is understanding the basic climate science and the paleoclimate, et cetera. The 25% mix is, okay, what do we need to do so we don't get depressed when we leave this course?
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah.
But I think just being almost like, you know, like those little labels that you get on a soda. It's like, you know, just, you know, it's almost like we said, you know, what is our ratio between these two main factors? It would be really helpful.
Well, and the other trick about the manual is the way that it's formatted is it's got 24 separate investigations, which means people can pick and choose because some of them are duplicates in some sense, but it's just a different resource they're using. And so if somebody has a tendency towards solution based, then they can probably go to the last piece and really expand on that. Because I mean, that's using En-ROADS and C-ROADS and Google Earth and so on. And there's just a lot that they can build onto with it.
Perfect. Thanks, Frank.
Yeah. James, I think you got a hand up, maybe?
Or is that from earlier, Jim? I think that might have been from earlier.
Okay. Patrick?
I'll give Jim just another second here. Looks like he's good though. Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of throw out there your question that you posed was, about going into the realm of informal.
Yeah.
And most of my last 12, 15 years I've spent bumping around in that realm. And my response would be like, it's a huge breadth of things and it's specific in each of its facets, right? Like there's a certain type of activities that are useful to take to AZA and present to zoos and aquariums. There's a very different type that would be useful for after school programs, different again for summer camps. And so I know that there are similar switches in how you can shorten activities and kind of change the interaction types. But I would push a little bit to say, rather than saying you want to go informal, to say, I'm interested in providing activities for zoos and aquariums, or I would really like to help with outdoor ed programs to give them activities they can do in the field. And exploring that realm a little bit so that the activities are targeted, because I've seen a lot of informal activities kind of flop because they were too general. Just putting that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and part of what I'm doing here today was not only asking for advice on how it could be applied, but also encouraging folks that as you go through the manual, if you find something that you think you might want to try with a group that you work with, give me some feedback in terms of how well it worked and what you did with it. And a big part of this is throwing these activities out that I do with my students, but then hearing back from other people, this is what I did with my students, and this sucked, or this worked great. Yeah, Emily.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Patrick and Frank. I think that having a pathway set between activities, you know, where it's an agreed upon curriculum that is intentionally forked for the different settings, because there are some groups that I'm going to work with that are, you know, if it's not a 2-minute like video on YouTube, they're probably not going to engage with it to start with, you know. And so like I've been watching a bunch of, you know, NASA course curriculum guides, and it'd be nice to have different pathways set for different ways in, and some sort of systemization of that. And Patrick, I think you're right about how it gets formatted for the specific sub audiences.
And you folks are beginning to give me some ideas where I need to contact some of the people I used to work with in a couple of different museums, try a couple of things. So thank you for that.
Are you thinking, I have a question. Are you thinking that, I mean, because it's primarily geared towards undergrads, right? I mean, do you?
Undergrad non-science majors.
So it may fit with like like heavily, you know, or sort of advanced science students at the high school level.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, it would be interesting. I mean, there's a couple of us informal folks on the phone. I'm just looking at Eric. Eric has a lot of experience in this too, like where a program like this might fit, you know, you know, I'm just trying to think about like where, like at our museum, like it might fit if we were offering a course, or like thinking about like whether it's a one-off program for like a school group, a science school group coming that was really interested in climate science and trying to figure out how would this work with our campus or our exhibit or science on a sphere or like whatever it is, you know, as a packaged piece. Or is it like is it really intended to be scaffolded and like a sequential like knowledge building, knowledge acquisition thing? And is that your priority? Like I'm also wondering like where you think the priority is and where you might have the most impact.
Yeah, the thing about it is that one of the reviewers I had on the original manual was a guy who I worked with in the board at Ecumenical Ministries, and he looked at it and he said, "Do you have your students go through all of this?" I say, "Yeah, most of it." But you look at the individual pieces, and even the individual investigations are broken down into individual activities. And so those individual activities it becomes a case of, okay, what's your audience? How do you reword the questions? I mean, I've done activities with my undergrads that I've done with middle school and even elementary school students, but I just changed the questions.
Maybe just because, Jen mentioned the informal science education stuff that I've done. I think that's key, Frank, is knowing your audience and then framing the questions. And I did the climate reality training project, over the summer. And one of the big things that they focused on was tell your story, know your audience. So when we go and give these presentations, you kind of do a little bit of research prior to going, understand the geography of the area, the local concerns, what they're working on, who they are. Are they a church group? Are they a student group? What resonates with them, so that you can make your presentation germane to that. So I don't know your toolkit yet, so I'll explore it and look for opportunities and maybe follow up, in terms of
That'd be great.
where it might be used. But thanks for presenting it. But that's my only thought, is really know, to your point, know your audience well, understand what energizes them, and then customize the use of the toolkit or the resources of the presentation to that audience.
Yeah. Yeah, and the big thing to really want to emphasize is the original target for this was undergraduate non-science majors. If you've ever taught a general studies course in community college or university, these are not your science superstars.
Yeah, that's the strength of it though, Frank. I mean, the strength of it is that it's essentially written for a general adult audience. And because it's written for a general adult audience, I can think of like 20 different uses for it, like that we need, like policymaker seminar series for policymakers. Like it is to Jen's point, it's a knowledge building resource that is coherent, organized in a way for flow to cover the terrain that we need it to cover on climate science, and like how we sort of go forward from that. So yeah, really helpful to think about. And I do think there is a little bit, to Eric's point, there's a little bit of tailoring that you would need to do around not only the questions that you ask, but like what resource linkages you might want to add in on the last 3 chapters. Of course, I've like been sitting here going through every chapter as we're talking. But the last 3 chapters, like to be able to think about like, how do you tailor? Like if I was to talk to rural audiences, I would include like the Rural Climate Network and like some of the ICLEI resources. And like, so you target some of the resources too. Yeah.
So, and Deb, one question I have for you is that one in the second to the last section, there's a resource called, there's an investigation called Climate Change on a Community Scale. And if you look through that, I'm targeting the Quinault Reservation.
That was a great
Partly because
project.
I know somebody who teaches middle school there.
That was a great project.
And some of these, that's one in particular that I'm really looking at figuring out how to actually get that community involved in developing that activity.
Yeah, and there's a few other models that are circulating now about community-based, like synergistic across different cultural groups within communities, but like if I think of it as like place-based community work, how do we do that?
Something I could add in, and having worked with Eric on this, because Eric was so instrumental. By the way, just people know, Chabot Space and Science Center, where Eric has done so much work on climate change, it's there with Eric that I learned how to work with teens around climate science, about the volunteers. We would have the biggest turnout of all the volunteers, the adults and the students at Chabot would turn out for Earth Days around climate change. There's the thing of taking advantage of where the community is inviting people to come and bring education of all types, not just about science, and certainly not just about climate change. But if it's really good and engages the public, how welcome you are. I mean, we go to public events where it's not even about science, but we bring science booths, and it's so popular that we're welcome. We do things. Or the events with the Girl Scouts, I mean, talk about a well-known youth group, right? They have hands-on events, or they have events where they want hands-on, and it's not necessarily about science. In fact, most of the booths aren't about science, but we're one of the science booths. So it's that thing if you're good, if you're something that just people love, that general audiences come up and do things. And that's the thing to share that of. There are all these opportunities to bring climate change to places where, well, we can be or we cannot be. It's up to us. But they're not climate change events. We make them climate change events. And just that thing on this, now, so it ties in all these, and then of course they draw back to Frank, to your incredible work, back to Clean, because there's no way in 5 minutes or 20 minutes or even an hour we're going to cover everything. We're not trying to. But we do want for many people, their first experience to be, I love this stuff. This doesn't make me cry, and it doesn't make me want to put my head under a pillow. It makes me want out and do something, and this was cool. I love climate science, that kind of thing. Anyway, but please, the group here has accomplished so much together. And Eric, I mean, really, I learned to do what I know how to do through you, okay?
I'm noticing that the clock's almost running out. I just wanted to thank everybody a lot for your input. I mean, this is great. This is great. And I do want to share with you a very unusual set of circumstances to use the manual. I'm a Quaker, and actually have my first bout in graduate school was in seminary. And so I do some religious education on occasions, and I got asked by our friends meeting to do do a session on spiritual resilience in times of crisis. And so mine's is spiritual resilience in time of climate crisis. And I'm modifying the introduction to the manual as the template for that particular session. So yeah, that's really different than I usually use it for, but it should be interesting.
Frank, I put that contact information of that guy as a personal chat item, so you might want to grab it.
Fantastic, thanks.
Frank, thank you so much for this. This work is just incredible, and like really thinking together as a community about how to lift this kind of work and really leverage it for other purposes.
Yeah, and I do want to really emphasize something I said earlier, is that just because my name's on the manual doesn't mean I'm the only person involved with it. And also, Wendy, anything you want to steal, feel free. I'm retired. I don't have to care about making, I don't have to care about tenure.
Well, I just dropped Frank Granshaw's email in the chat in case folks want to get in touch. His slide deck is on the Clean website. We also shared it, and I think many of you jumped on that in the chat.